By the late 1700s, the land we know as Texas was a Mexican state on the northeastern frontier of the Spanish Empire. It was uncharted territory. When the French threatened to expand westward, Spain reasserted its control by building fortified missions throughout the colonies.
There were indigenous cultures who lived in this area. They happened to be nomadic. To hold the frontier, you needed to make the Indians into farmers. You get them to become part of the community. The mission system would be the process by which the indigenous people would be settled in one place.
This was the roots of the city of San Antonio. It was the first page of Texas history.
Spain had established missions throughout Texas. 5 were built along the San Antonio River. The first, Mission San Antonio de Valero, would come to be known as the Alamo. Today, the 4 others make up San Antonio Mission's National Historical Park.
The 4 missions that make up the national park are Mission Concepcion, Mission San Jose, Mission San Juan, and Mission Espada.
Although the Crown financed the missions and the church administered them, the mission did not belong to the Crown or to the church. It belonged to the indigenous people for whom the mission was founded.
By the early 1800s, the Franciscans felt their work was done. They turned over the missions to the people.
The Franciscan priests were moved to California, and there was no one to take care of the property, so they began to fall into disrepair.
So you had ruins, and then it wouldn't be until the end of the 19th century that there would be a preservation program.
San Antonio Mission's National Historical Park is the only national park in America with active churches. Responsibilities are split. The Archdiocese maintains the interior of the sanctuaries, and the National Park Service takes care of the outer walls and the grounds. It is a unique partnership.
Well, San Antonio Mission's National Historical Park was created in 1978 through legislation signed by President Jimmy Carter. It took about 5 years to sort out the agreements between Archdiocese, Department of the Interior, in order to manage those areas as a National Historical Park.
So, but then you're in a position where you have the federal government managing something with religious value to it, right? Is that a little fine line that we're walking on here?
Well, again, it took 5 years, I think, to sort that out on paper, and still today presents some interesting challenges in managing the park as one unit.
When the national park set up and the mission national parks were set up, the Archdiocese of San Antonio, because of a ruling by the Attorney General for the separation of church and state, had to keep the responsibility of keeping the mission churches and any other buildings used for religious purposes. And that's been a big burden, and we've gone to public and private entities to get funding for it, and there's a current campaign to establish a long-term fund to keep this continuing much-needed preservation work going over the next 10 to 15 years. And that was my point.
Felix Samaraz, you wanted to?
Yes, I'd like to follow up. In 1983, when the cooperative agreements were signed, it was made very clear that there would be a separation of church and state, and they even used an example that if you take the wall of the churches, there would be this imaginary membrane that would be between, and then everything outside then would be the responsibility of National Park Service in a crisis. But everything inside then was responsibility of the Archdiocese of San Antonio. The general public doesn't realize this. They believe that if los pastores or rather Los Compadres, not Pastores is that cultural arts group. Los Compadres raise funds to, they're like the support group of National Park Service, but the general public confuses that and say, well, if they're raising funds, why aren't they taking care of the mission, the churches? This is why this organization, this initiative called Las Misiones, was launched to raise funds to take care of the church, the mission church buildings, and to preserve and to restore them. Because the church does not receive funds from the public for this particular project.
So David Vicasi, as someone who worked for the Park Service and has the burden of keeping them in top shape if you can, but you can't cross the line. I mean, how do you deal with these? You know, where do you stop? Where do you say, hey, wait, this is out of my jurisdiction. I can put an electrical outlet in here, but I can't fix the wall or something like that.
Well, in terms of the agreement with separation of church and state, as Dr. Almaraz mentioned, it really does stop right with the church buildings. It can get very complicated because there are structures attached to those church structures that we are responsible to maintain. Of course, there are archaeological resources that are beneath the churches. Any foundation-type repairs that are required for those church structures are going to require some archaeology. So there does need to be some cooperation in terms of trying to make all those things happen in the appropriate ways.